Marion's notes, Jasmine Crockett arrived at Zion Baptist Church at 7:12 a.m., 38 minutes earlier than the listening session was scheduled to begin. This was rare, not because Crockett liked to be late, but because she was always too busy. With a schedule overlapping with hearings, local trips, and constituent correspondence, Jasmine always arrived just in time, enough to start promptly, but never early enough to sit alone in an empty room. But today was different. It seemed she knew this place would tell her a terrible secret. Zion Baptist is located on a small hill south of the town of Beaumont, Texas, where the land is higher than the road, and the entrance is a cement staircase worn by time. The white walls inside the church had begun to turn gray. The ceiling fans turned slowly. The frosted glass doors still bore children's handprints. And at the end of the room, a whiteboard propped on a wooden stand was tilted to one side, where Jasmine had written the afternoon before. Community voices. Everyone has the right to be heard. Jasmine wiped the board herself, writing each word with a purple pen, then underlining the word heard, not speak. Because she knew those who walked into this room today may have spoken many times, but had never truly been heard. She stood still in the empty room for a few minutes, looking around. There was only the sound of wind coming through the crack in the door and the early morning light sweeping diagonally across the rows of chairs that were not yet aligned. One seat in the far corner, near the dusty frosted window, was occupied. A small, dark-skinned woman wearing a light gray cardigan was Aisha Monroe. She did not stand up when Jasmine entered, but her eyes, those eyes did not leave the whiteboard in front, where the words, "Everyone has the right to be heard," had just dried. She arrived even before Jasmine. No one knew how or when, but her presence, quiet, steady, not taking up space, was what gave the entire room weight. She sat on the chair, her right hand holding a worn black leather-bound notebook. The notebook was tied with a blue fabric ribbon with a bluebonnet floral pattern, a 37th birthday gift from her son. The cover faced her lap. Her hand resting on the notebook was clenched so tightly her fingertips were white. It felt like a very important keepsake. Jasmine did not ask her name. She did not want to break the fragile balance that was present. But she had seen those eyes before. The eyes of people who came not to tell a story, but to check if the world was still worthy of them telling it. In the early light, her face showed deep lines of time, not necessarily due to age, but because she had kept something for too long beneath her skin. Jasmine felt as if she was ready to tell her a story. She did not know what the other woman would say. She wasn't even sure she would speak. But one thing was clearer than anything else. This was no longer an ordinary listening session. And if there was a secret waiting to be spoken, perhaps it had begun the moment that woman walked in. The sound of the church's wooden door creaked open, breaking the flow of nostalgia. An elderly woman wearing a dark purple velvet coat, carrying a hand-embroidered fabric bag that looked decades old. A young man wearing a hoodie, a faded Marvin Gaye t-shirt, sat down quickly in the middle row, without taking off his backpack. A young man holding a baby who was sucking his finger, his glasses fogged up from rushing. They did not greet each other, but each looked at the other with incredibly sincere eyes, looking at the whiteboard in front, carrying the same unnamed thing. They were here to be heard. And Jasmine sat waiting, starting with a friendly greeting, and when she looked into each pair of eyes, filled with so many thoughts, it would only take a nudge to spill out. Her purple pen was uncapped, resting on the paper, as if it too was listening. A middle-aged man stood up, wearing a worn baseball cap, holding a fabric bag filled with papers. His voice was not loud, but so deep that everyone had to hold their breath to listen. "I have 3 children. All 3 are good students. But the oldest, only 9 years old, is followed every time he goes into Walmart. Not by security guards, but it was the gaze of the passers-by themselves. I asked if it saw it. It said yes, but it said it was used to it." No one said anything, but somewhere, someone pulled out a tissue, and Jasmine, writing nothing, just looked up, her eyes gentle as water but conveying an unspoken message directly to the man. "I hear you." She recalled the first time she stood before a court, as a public defender. The defendant was a black teenager, accused of robbing a convenience store with only one witness. and that witness had misidentified him from a blurry camera. She won the case, but when she walked out, the boy wasn't smiling. He asked, "Miss, will they look at me differently?" And Jasmine just smiled, hugging him. Because truthfully, she didn't dare give a precise answer. From then on, she chose the path less traveled, not because it was smooth, but because it started from a place where people had no one to walk with. She declined many gatherings, many television opportunities, just to return to rural areas like Beaumont. She didn't come back here to find her roots, but to return a fairness that had been stripped away for too long, even in the way people were allowed to tell their stories. The listening session continued. The narratives began to lose their regularity, no longer connected by anger, but by a heavier feeling: exhaustion. People still stood up one by one, but they weren't speaking to be heard anymore. They spoke as if to keep themselves from sinking. Stories about children expelled from school for curly hair, for uncooperative attitude, for not saying yes fast enough. Stories about going to school early to avoid backpack checks, about teachers asking, "What does your name mean in English?" on the first day of class. Jasmine Crockett still sat in the back row, back straight, shoulders still. But her eyes moved constantly, not looking at her phone, not looking at her notebook. She looked at each speaker as if flipping through an invisible file in her head. But instead of looking for flaws, she memorized every small detail. A man scratching his neck when lying about his workplace. A young girl biting her lip when mentioning her father. Jasmine saw it all, and she didn't take notes because some things, if written down too early, lose their true life. Aisha Monroe still hadn't stood up. She was still in the back row, on the right, her posture unchanged. But deep inside, the sound had begun. Not something anyone else could hear, but the gradual breaking of a shell that had been held together for too long. Aisha shifted slightly, her back lifted from the chair, but that movement was enough to make the room pause. No one told anyone, but the whispers gradually faded. Hands that were writing slowed down. The person at the back of the room turned their head. Those sitting closer began to move aside, as if to create a clear line of sight. Aisha was not a good speaker. She had never spoken in front of a crowd. She had never stood in a room with more people than had ever attended her son's birthday. Since that day, the day everyone in this town had heard about, but no one dared to look directly at, she was like a ghost trapped in the small town. Sometimes people no longer remembered how happy a woman she used to be. And that's what made this moment something no one could bear to interrupt. The story Aisha was about to tell, no one had ever heard in full. Some had guessed, some had whispered. But her silence for the past 2 years was the reason why today, every gaze needed confirmation, from the very mouth of the person who had lived through it. It's just that some things, if not spoken in the right voice, at the right rhythm, by the right person, will forever lose the chance to be heard correctly. Each story just told made her ache in a different place. When someone talked about their child being called the wrong name, she remembered Damarian saying his teacher called him Darren all semester. When a mother told of her child being made to write a report by the supervisor for a suspicious gait, she remembered her son always walked fast when it was cold, because he didn't want his mother's hands to get dry from washing winter clothes. The pain of others thus crept into her memory, occupied every space she had cleared for forgetting. In her memory, Damarian appeared very clearly, the boy with a gap-toothed smile, bright eyes, and the habit of walking barefoot in the house, even though she had told him countless times about the cold tile floor. He liked to draw houses, no people, just walls, roofs, windows, and a tree in the corner of the yard. When she asked why he didn't draw anyone, he laughed. "I don't know how to draw your face right yet, Mom." Her voice was not loud, not high, but clear and firm, as if it had been repeated hundreds of times in her heart, and this was just the first time it had left her mouth. "I don't hope for anything anymore, but my son deserves to have his name mentioned, even just once." She paused for a beat. The hand placed on the notebook was now trembling slightly. 2 years ago, my son left home in the late afternoon. He walked home after stopping by the bakery on the corner, because it was his sister's birthday that day. And he didn't come back. A sigh from someone at the back of the room. But Aisha didn't look around. She continued, steady and firm. He was shot twice while crossing the street to go home. The police said it was a case of mistaken identity, said the suspect was wearing a light blue shirt, said it was dark, couldn't see the face clearly. But my son was wearing a gray shirt, faded jeans, and always walked on the sidewalk. He knew his mother didn't like him running across the street. Jasmine looked directly at Aisha. The look she gave the woman, who would surely never forget, was one of immense pity. Hidden deep within her dark pupils was a sea of tears waiting to pour out. The report stated that an unidentified young male had suspicious behavior. They didn't include camera footage, didn't contact witnesses. I submitted a petition. They said the case is closed, no valid complaint. A breath was held in her throat, but she didn't cry. I'm not a good writer. I don't know how to say this to make it sound legal. I just know he was my son, and he didn't do anything wrong except wear the wrong color shirt in the wrong color neighborhood. The entire room was silent, but somewhere a heart of a parent shattered. Everyone knew how painful that incident was, and every time they saw Aisha, they tried not to look into her eyes for fear of touching that wound that had not yet healed. A boy stood up from the fifth row of chairs, high school uniform, eyes red-rimmed. His hand still gripped the strap of his backpack. I went to the same school as Demarion, he said, his voice breaking in the middle of the sentence. I didn't see it with my own eyes, but I saw his blood on the sidewalk. They didn't let us go through that area for 3 days. He sobbed, then said as if shouting in his own injustice, they made us bow our heads, even when we didn't do anything wrong. A slight creak of a chair. Someone bowed their head. Someone raised a hand to their face. Aisha remained standing, and Jasmine, at that moment, gently stood up. Jasmine opened her arms and hugged the woman who was breaking in front of her, hoping that she would not collapse at her feet. I just want, Aisha repeated, for him not to be remembered as a name. I want him to be called as a child who once lived. How kind, how happy, and how optimistic he was. And for the first time, from the back row, that name was not just heard, but kept. No longer in a complaint, but in the memory of a community that was slowly being forgotten. 2 days after the listening session, Jasmine Crockett went to Aisha Monroe's house. The one-story house was located in a quiet street, just 2 blocks from the high school, but it felt as if it had been cut off from all the town's movement. The grass in the front yard grew unevenly, bordering the brick walkway. The wire fence was rusty, some parts still there, some missing. The mailbox was tilted to one side, its mouth slightly open. Aisha invited Jasmine in without asking why the door opened to a small space, with a faint smell of old laundry detergent. In the living room, thin cream-colored curtains were loosely tied to one side, the light shining on the wall reflecting the shadow of a line of text. Happy birthday, my little bunny, Leanne. The colored paper sign was still taped to the wall, the corners dulled with dust. Below the writing, a deflated balloon was attached. Only the wrinkled skin remained, hanging loosely on a red ribbon. I haven't taken it down, Aisha said, not looking at Jasmine. That was the last day he walked out of the house. The space in the room was incredibly clean, preserved, as if the boy had only just left. On the low shelf was a pair of soccer shoes, face up, white with one heel worn down, loosely crisscrossed laces. A light blue pillow was on the single chair, still holding a faint scent of baby powder, the kind of smell that would disappear after a few months if no one tried to keep it. In the left corner was a small desk, placed against the wall. On the desk was a map of the United States, taped with faded brown tape. A red dot was marked with a marker pen on the area of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. He said he would study there, Aisha said, her voice almost a thought spoken aloud. He watched a video of the University of Alabama on YouTube and said, Mom, they teach architecture here. I'm going to build houses that everyone wants to live in. Jasmine stood still. Her hand rested lightly on the case file in her bag. She didn't ask anything. She just looked at each object, as if they were real witnesses, pages that had never been written into any report. Aisha walked to the desk. Her hand gently rested on the surface. Not wiping, not rearranging. Just a light stroke across. "I don't wipe that desk," she said, her eyes still on the pen marks. Jasmine nodded, then opened her bag and took out the file. She sat down at the coffee table and opened each page. First was the summary of the incident. 2 pages, unnumbered. The title line, Emergency Situation Handling. Handled. There were no scene photos, no location diagrams, no witness list. The suspect description section was blank. The evidence section was crossed out. Jasmine stopped at page 3, flipping it back and forth as if she couldn't believe her eyes. In over 20 pages of paper, not a single line clearly stated the victim's name. "They didn't call his name," Aisha said, still not turning back, "because if they don't call his name, then no one has to be responsible." Jasmine closed the file. "Put it down." Her hands were clasped together, no longer holding the politician's demeanor. At this moment, she was just a woman sitting amidst things that had been ignored for too long, and didn't know why she'd been silent until now. She didn't know what Crockett had said to the woman, but when he was out of sight, a faint glimmer of hope shone in the mother's eyes. Tuesday afternoon, after the meeting at the deceased boy's house, at a small diner hidden behind a gas station next to the highway. Inside the diner were 7 tables with cracked red leather seats and slightly flickering fluorescent lights. The waitress was a white woman in her early 40s, wearing a worn apron, calling customers honey. The diner wasn't crowded. There were only 2 other people, an old couple eating silently in the corner of the room. Near the window, Jasmine arrived on time. She walked straight to table number 3, sitting with her back to the wall facing the door. A glass of water was placed in front of her, but she hadn't drunk it yet. A black man walked in a few minutes later, in his early 40s, wearing a gray shirt buttoned all the way up, dark khaki pants with decisive steps. On his left wrist was a faint scar running from his palm to the middle of his forearm, clearly visible whenever he bent his wrist. He didn't look around, just walked straight towards Jasmine, sat down, and didn't take off his jacket. "Hello, ma'am Crockett," he said. Not a question. "You are," she replied. Her voice was neither sharp nor soft, just appropriate. He nodded. Then he took a white envelope from his jacket pocket. He placed it on the table and pushed it towards her. "I wrote the original report for the Damarian Monroe case," he said very evenly. "I was in internal affairs at the time." Jasmine looked at the envelope. She didn't open it immediately. She looked at the man for a few more seconds. "My name is Terrence. 17 years in the force. Retired 8 months ago." "For what reason?" Jasmine asked. "Because I couldn't look my mother in the face every time I wore the uniform," he said, without blinking. The space between the two of them was less than 3 handspans, but something was happening, a silent transfer, between someone who had been silent and someone who was learning to wait for the silence to end at the right time. Jasmine opened the envelope. Inside were 3 sheets of paper, color copies. The first sheet listed the date and time, 5:42 p.m., October 14th, 2023. The initial pursuit order, issued by a mid-level officer, described the suspect as wearing a light blue jacket, approximately 1.7 meters tall, person of color, short, curly hair. "I wrote exactly according to the initial description," Terrence said. "I don't know why it changed direction later. But when I came on shift the next day, the report had been updated. Suspect wearing a gray shirt, 1.65 meters tall, walking, curly hair, person of color." No one told me when the change happened. Jasmine turned to page 2, the scene report. The image section was blank. There was no name of the officer in charge of scene photos. The evidence collected section was filled in with a different handwriting, slightly slanted, an old-style capital P symbol. She recognized the handwriting. It was that of the Internal Investigation Unit captain, who had the authority to legalize the final modifications. "Which officer fired the shot?" Jasmine asked. "Bradley Trent," Terrence replied, without hesitation. "You know that, right?" She didn't answer. She just folded the documents, put them in her leather bag, zipped it up, and looked up. "What do you want by sending me these papers?" He sat still for a few seconds, then said, "I don't need anything. But when I saw that woman's eyes at your Community Voice event and the hug you gave her, I thought, I also bear some guilt for that loss. I also have children who wear hoodies, who are often called the wrong name in class. And I probably wouldn't be able to live another day if tomorrow they were lying on a street corner with handled written on the report. Jasmine looked at the man longer than the previous time. She didn't say thank you, but when she stood up, she placed her hand on the back of the chair, squeezing gently. Not everyone chooses the right time to speak up, she said. But the important thing is that finally you were brave enough to do what has been weighing on your mind for so long. The man didn't reply, but in his gaze a captive soul had just been set free. Jasmine left the cafe, without taking the bill, without resuming her fast pace. Her hand remained on the leather bag as if holding on to something still burning hot. And for the first time in 2 years, she held something that couldn't be dismissed from the record. Living proof. Deputy Chief Bradley Trent's office was at the end of a long corridor, where the white fluorescent light was chillingly bright. The room was strictly clean. The desk had no stray papers. The swivel chair was neatly tucked behind it, and behind that was a bookshelf more than half empty. In the middle of the shelf was a small photo frame, face down. Jasmine Crockett walked in. No introduction needed. No federal representative banner needed. Her presence was the clearest confirmation that sometimes justice can walk in, wearing flats and a voice that isn't raised. She didn't question. She didn't flip through files. She didn't assert authority. She just opened her bag, placed a stack of paper files on the light-colored wooden desk, as lightly as one folds a memorial photo. Bradley Trent remained seated behind the desk. The man who had shot Jasmine Monroe and had lived through hundreds of internal investigations didn't flinch. He spoke about procedure, about pressure, about no time for analysis. He spoke as if repeating a recording he had heard too many times. But Jasmine didn't argue. She didn't come to win an argument. "I didn't come to convict you," she said, her voice even, her gaze steady. "I came to ask you, do you sleep well?" For a moment, Trent didn't answer immediately. He turned his face away and touched the small photo frame face down on the shelf. His finger gently touched the wooden edge, as if trying to remember what was inside, or as if afraid to turn it over. Jasmine stood up. Truth for her had never been a shout. It was a clean desk, a stack of files placed down, and a question that silenced the one accustomed to justifying for the first time. Aisha Monroe had gone through each day like that. When people lose a child, the first thing that disappears is not the laughter in the house, but the rhythm of life that was once so regular it was invisible. No more morning slipper sounds, no more slightly ajar bedroom door, no longer even the question, "What's for dinner tonight?" Because there will be an empty space no one bothers to fill. The first year she kept the silence in her notebook. The following year she learned how to go to the market without stopping at the cake stand. And this year she stood in the park in front of the church, her hands having learned how to let go. Beside her was Jasmine Crockett. The air was slightly cool. On the grass there were still damp patches from the rain the night before. The plastic chairs were not in straight rows, but they were full of people. A few students wore old-school t-shirts. A few elderly people wore dark clothes, not talking to anyone. Jasmine opened a regularly printed paper. She didn't need it, but she held it anyway, as if maintaining some form for something that was inherently too bare. Jasmine Elijah Monroe, 14 years old. Jasmine had restored the purity of a pure soul and brought peace to another soul filled with storms. Aisha stepped forward at the encouragement of Jasmine and everyone else. She stepped onto the platform, the sunlight illuminating a face that had thought it would only remain in darkness forever. She only said, "I used to be afraid to go out, because I knew people would look at me as if I were the mother of the boy who died because of his own fault. Today I came here to say that I am Jasmine's mother, and the boy, he was not a criminal. And to have this day, it is because we have Jasmine, who is our voice, our light, Jasmine Crockett." After 2 seconds of silence, applause rang out one after another, carrying with it cheers and congratulations, interspersed with a few fierce, "We love Crockett" shouts. Aisha looked towards Jasmine. The look was like the way two women look at each other when they know that, here, at this moment, neither of them is alone anymore. The news spread with just a small line at the end of the evening news. Officer Bradley Trent suspended without pay. Chief Inspector Voss, who signed off on the adjusted report, officially indicted for manipulating public records. There was no arrest in the middle of the night, no live television, but in the old meeting room of the district police station, Voss's portrait had been taken down, leaving a faded patch on the wall. A few weeks later, in her office, Jasmine opened a new letter, another mother, signed with smudged blue ink. Her son was disciplined for a suspicious posture in front of the cafeteria door. The letter was not long, but the way she ended it made Jasmine pause for a moment. I no longer know where to send this, but I believe if you are the one who kept Demarion's name, then perhaps you will also know how not to let my son disappear like that. Jasmine folded the letter, placed it on the desk. She didn't open her computer, didn't mark it, didn't immediately respond. She just left it there, a small moment for receiving the trust that someone else had poured out with all the remaining fragments.